Recording in progress.
Everybody, welcome back to The Broken Brain. It is a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be here with you virtually. And it's funny, I can be with you all sorts of crazy times and places, wherever you are. If you're doing the dishes or driving your car, those are the two main things people do during podcasts, seems like, right? That's an activity-based medium. But I am joined today by Cathy Heller, who is an author, a podcaster, host of the Abundant Ever After podcast, and author of the new book, Abundant Ever After, Tools for Creating a Life of Prosperity and Ease. Cathy's a teacher, a spiritual coach. You can tell me if coach is a good word or not. Some people like it and some people not so much, but I'll let you.
You can call me anything. Doesn't matter.
Well, let's test that out. No, welcome, Cathy. I'm so grateful to have you on the show today.
You're so sweet. Thank you. I love that you do this. I told you before we hit record that it's just so beautiful to see so many men and women, but especially men, like just leading such a deeply holistic, emotional, brilliant, finding our voice, finding our way to our truth conversation. I think it's really important.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And, I'm looking forward to getting into some of the work you're doing and what led you into it and to write the book and that kind of stuff. Tell people a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what got you into this kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So I guess what got me into it is that I grew up in a household, probably not so different than most people's household in some ways. My parents were just miserable. Like my dad had a tremendous amount of anxiety. My mom was struggling with depression. My parents had a horrible marriage. They wound up having an even more horrible divorce. My mom tried to commit suicide twice when I was a kid. So she went off to a facility, and it was just extremely sad. There was just a lot of pain. And as a teenager, I was kind of living by myself in this apartment. My dad was gone. My sister was off at college. My mom was kind of fighting for her life in a way. Maybe you could say fighting to choose to live. And it was just extremely depressing. And so when I graduated from high school, barely, honestly, my teacher had to change my grade so that I wouldn't repeat the year because he knew that I needed to leave home. Because if I went to college, I could get financial aid and move out, which was really healthy for me. And so I went to college on academic probation and had to get straight A's in order to keep the college admission. And I got 3 jobs to pay for it, but that was good because I got out of my very sad home. And so I was at that point really hungry for a meaning to life. And I started reading every possible book that could give me any answers to that. And one thing led to another. And I wound up taking a trip to Jerusalem. And that was supposed to be like a 3-week trip after college. And I was so unbelievably compelled by a therapist who I had met the last day of the trip, who was a Buddhist Jewish therapist, a Jew-boo. And he talked about meditation. And he said, have you ever considered that the idea of the Sabbath is to give yourself a pause and to be in stillness, to really come home to the insight within you? And I had never considered that's, and he said, well, actually, that's what the word means. The Sabbath in Hebrew is the word Shabbat, which doesn't mean rest like sleep. It means like meditative stillness. And he said, when you find that stillness within you, you open the doorway to the divine, which lives inside of you. And I thought that was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. So I extended my trip, and then I wound up staying there. I lived in the old city of Jerusalem for 3 years, and I met this incredible family, a rabbi and his wife and their 7 children. And one thing led to another, and they took me in. They let me stay there. And the rabbi taught me all of this incredible wisdom. And all I had to do was like help with the kids a little bit, which was so easy to do. And I was 21, 22, 23. And then when I was 24, I had this whisper to move to Los Angeles. And one thing led to another. And I wound up at UCLA. They had a mindfulness center. They still do. They had just started it. And I went on this silent retreat. I thought it was going to be so fun. And it was so hard. And it was so hard that I was really interested in cracking the code. And so I wound up spending a lot of time there. And I wound up finding a teacher. and I wound up training with her. This is in, 2005, 6, 7. And I started teaching groups of meditation. And then, long story short, now I'm 45. So it's been 23 years. And now I teach Jewish wisdom and mindfulness meditation because those two verticals have really been such a door to abundance for me.
You found them to be very complementary to each other, it looks like. And I know in your book you talk about this, right? The combination of how you approach that. What would you describe as some principles of mindfulness and of the traditional Judaism, as you got Jewish wisdom? What would some of those principles that you would bring into helping someone to get mindful and to become more healthy?
Well, one of the things that's interesting is that, we've all heard about Abraham, and we hear that he was like the father of monotheism. That's what people say. But what's really fascinating is that the central prayer in Judaism, it's not that there is one God, which there is. It's even deeper than that. Abraham says God is oneness. So that means that there is nowhere God isn't, and that we are each connected to that oneness. And so my rabbi said to me, you're no body, you're not a body, you're a soul. So you're someone, you're some of the one. You're a masterpiece, you're a piece of the master. And Einstein said that the world is not made of 3 dimensions, but the naked eye only perceives 3D reality, because the world is actually made of atoms, which means that everything is connected to everything else. It's like a swirl of frequency. And we are each emitting a vibration. It's a vibrational world, which means it is all one. It's like each one of us is a wave in the ocean, and there is no place where one wave ends and another begins. So really it is this one infinite field, and we're all connected. And the way we know that is when you go to sleep at night, whether you're aware or not, your body is tracking the circadian rhythm of the sun, moon, and stars while you sleep. That's how connected we all are to the cosmos. We are that connected. When someone walks in a room, you can feel their energy. It's good or it's bad. It makes you feel more energy or makes you feel depleted, because we all are transmitting energetically to each other all the time, which means we're all in a pool of consciousness. So the reason why that is so powerful and why it connects with mindfulness is because the idea of being mindful means actually the opposite of being in your mind, right? Because the amygdala, which is the back of the brain, is really there to protect you. So it spits out fear-based worst case scenarios. And the truth is that recently they did a fMRI scan on a bunch of monks, and they found very little brain activity, because the wisdom that they have doesn't come from the brain, it comes from the heart. And when we are mindful, we are going to the place where we're witnessing the mind, and we're coming from that witness consciousness. And that actually brings us into alignment with our soul. It's this part of us that's bigger than that spinning mind. One really lovely way my teacher once described this, my mindfulness teacher, she said, if you look at the ocean, you see waves all the time. The ocean is very reactive, and it reacts to the weather. But if you went down into the ocean and you went down 10 feet, it's still. And if you went down 20 feet, it's so still. And if you go down a mile, which you can in some parts of the ocean, it's so still that it could burst your eardrums. It's like glass. It's so still. So the ocean is really 99.999% of the ocean is like stillness. We perceive it as being very fast and frenetic. That is like us, she said, because the mind is like the waves. It's the superficial aspect of us that is constantly reactive. But who we really are and who we can really access in ourselves is the equanimity, which is that still ocean within. And then we can look up at the waves, which is noticing the mind. And then we can just see that it's beautiful. It's just doing what minds do. Minds are reactive, but we don't have to be caught in the mind, because that's what makes us feel that cortisol, that stress that actually hurts us on a biological level.
So it's been interesting. I've noticed a healthy, I think, trend amongst a lot of the people that I've been interviewing lately, psychologists, therapists, and those that are in more the mindful meditative coach, people with a spiritual approach, those kinds of things. One of the things I'm hearing a lot in some modern techniques is this idea of, first of all, acceptance, and I'll use your language you just did, like the waves, this surface thing, with this awareness, this consciousness of here's my thoughts and everything, and we judge ourselves and others by some of those, especially as they link to behavior. And you're talking about kind of then not rejecting it, accepting it, but then also going down a little deeper and saying like there's a me that's under that. I am not just those thoughts. And getting out of our head seems to be a real modern trend in psychotherapy, I will say, as well as like the self-exploration and kind of things that would be more in your realm, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's just people have all heard at this point about flow state. Like, what's flow state? I think of Will Ferrell in when I think of flow state because he doesn't even know what he's going to say next, which is why it's so fun and so funny, right? And kindergartners are like that. They're not in their brain overthinking and over controlling. They're just playing. And that's kind of more of our right hemisphere, the part of us that wants to play and get messy. As we get older, we're so afraid of being rejected that we get more into the left brain and we stop seeing possibility because we're trying to predict things so much. We're trying to control how people perceive us. We're trying to control so much. And the little kids are not trying to control anything, which is why they're having such a better experience. And when you're in flow state, you're in spontaneity. You're just enjoying your moment, right? And then that is a different kind of being connected to your mind. It's really the reason why Michael Jordan did so well is because he was meditating, and that meditation allowed him, because his coach Phil Jackson, that's what he had them do. It's amazing to me actually that every other NBA team didn't model that, because Phil Jackson worked for the Bulls and the Lakers, had them both meditate their butts off, and then they won all those championships. And you might say, if you're another coach, why wouldn't you say, there's something to that meditation thing, right? Like, why is that working? It's because when they were on the court, they were able to go beyond the analytical mind and move into flow. And when a person walks in the room, the most potent thing that's impressing anyone else is not what they're wearing, it's their energy. When there's more of you that's open and resonant and present, you move through life with such a force. Like, that is a person in flow. They're not in the fear part of the mind is very concerned with how it's being perceived. So it's guarded and it's trying to control, and it's not being authentic, and it's not in the moment because it's always trying to rehearse itself. You can't be in flow state in that place. But when your life is a little bit more like a living meditation and you're just authentic and you're playful and you're joyful, the coolest things will get created that you could have never predicted, because your energy itself becomes so much life force in the room.
I always like to ask people when they are a proponent of mindfulness or when they teach meditation and those kinds of things. How do you, first of all, let's maybe define kind of that approach of what makes meditation meditation. People have heard me say this on the show ad nauseum. Meditation is one of those like best kept secrets that nobody doesn't know about. In other words, it's this really,
Yeah.
really healthy thing that a lot of people are like, yeah, I should do that, but I don't do it. So how do we break that down? Like, how do you define meditation and get people to
First
get
of all,
into it?
I love that question because I have a love-hate relationship with it, because our bodies are legit, literally addicted to cortisol. We don't want to stop thinking because cortisol is more addictive than nicotine. And when you are in stress and you are constantly in that place, your body feeds off it. It's like asking someone to get off sugar. Everyone knows they should, but no one wants to.
Mhm.
We're addicted to sugar. Our body wants it, right? I want the gummy bears. I know I shouldn't eat them, but I definitely want to eat them. So that's number one. Number two, when I first started meditating, I went to a meditation retreat and my friend brought me there. And halfway through, I wanted to get up and leave, but this is before the years of Uber, and she drove me. And I was like, I can't get home unless I stay. And I was so embarrassed. I thought, why is she having the best time and I hate this so much? And then the teacher had mercy on me, and she saw how uncomfortable I was. And she said, listen, if you're sitting here struggling, I want you to remember that the same way that your heart will always be beating as long as you're alive, your mind will always be racing. You will never stop it. And all of a sudden I felt this relief. And she said, the point of meditation is not to stop your thoughts. That's impossible. The point of meditation is to just notice your mind and just move into the place. She said, try this. She said, Ask your mind, I wonder what your next thought will be. And just witness it. And then she said, now try this. She said, this is radical. Try witnessing your mind with curiosity and not judging it. And she said, see, you want to judge it. No, don't judge it. Just notice. I'm thinking about what I ate. I'm thinking about my mother-in-law. I'm thinking about how angry I am about whatever. Just notice it. And then she said, now, don't you notice that while you're noticing your mind, now you're not your mind, you're noticing your mind. And now she said, could you just be curious? What's happening in your body as you begin to notice your mind? And then she said, imagine if you were in a snowstorm, walking down the street, piles of snow, your car breaks down, miserable. She said, that's one experience. But imagine if you were inside a living room with a warm fireplace and you were looking at the snow through the window. She said, oh, then it's just so beautiful, right? So she said, instead of being caught in the mind, in the blizzard of all these negative thoughts that are just like pounding you, hammering you with cortisol, now you're just looking at this mind and you're like, the snow is gorgeous. I love the snow. And so she said, you get to find inside of you that you are bigger than this mind. And you will become more and more familiar with the part of you that is watching your mind and less familiar with the part of you that gets hijacked by the snowstorm. And I started to understand that. And then I would actually crave meditation because I would say, oh yeah, this mind is so exhausting. And I get to turn to the other channel where I'm watching it. And then what happens is after a while, you perceive this thing called equanimity. As Jon Kabat-Zinn says, we don't stop the waves, but we learn to surf them. And everyone's always about being happy. And I think there's a greater feeling than happiness. I think it's equanimity. I think that there's no straight lines in nature, and there's never, ever, ever a moment in your life where everything is perfect. But I think there's something close to perfect about being with what is. Like I was at my father's funeral in July, and because I was so present, I could like cry. It was so beautiful to me because I was so present that even the pain was just love. It was love turned into something called grief. Mm-hmm. And I actually enjoyed feeling that because who doesn't want to feel love for somebody? Yeah. So I think we tell ourselves that these things have to be one way, and then we get caught in the mind. It's like I'll tell you one last thing. My mindfulness teacher said every day, have a cup of tea and invite everything in your life to have tea with you. The grief, the joy, the broken parts, the amazing parts. And she said, and you are so peaceful because all of it is welcome. And then you realize this thing called life, Jon Kabat-Zinn calls it the full catastrophe living. It's mesmerizing in its contrast. There are ups and downs and highs and lows, which actually make it really special and heartbreaking and beautiful and heartbreaking and beautiful. But there's something about pain that is also beautiful because it turns into wisdom. So I don't think that the pain is something we can avoid, and I don't think we should, but I think suffering is different than pain. I think pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. You know, I met Holocaust survivors that have tremendous pain and so much purpose that they don't feel they're suffering. They just feel the depth of the pain. So I don't know that we need to be resistant to whatever is here in the space. I think that there is a beauty. I think our soul is capable of feeling it all. And I don't think the mind is capable of feeling anything. So it's like when you get beyond this amygdala mind that wants to make meaning out of things and just keep making it worse, and you move into your heart and you let your heart be your guide, it has its own mind and it doesn't need it to be perfect because you love that you loved someone. So even when they're gone, you're so sad, but you're so happy that you got to love that person that almost the pain and the grief is more of that love. And we all have had that experience. So So I think that that's such a beautiful component to being in a deeper state of consciousness than just constantly in this repetitive, droning mind.
The funerals are a great example because I have found that depending on what we are looking for, there's all kinds of different things we can find there. Um, and when we resist the feelings instead of, as you put, I really like this observance, right? The curiosity piece of saying, I'm just going to observe this feeling. I don't want to fight it. Because you do hear people in funerals and other places that are highly emotional. Sometimes we'll even use language like, all right, I haven't broken down. I'm doing good. I'm doing well, right? We say, or even the term when we say things like, oh boy, I lost it. And
Yeah, that's so interesting. I lost it. You're right. I never thought of that.
And it's like, and what we mean by that is I experience my emotions a lot of times, right?
Which means I found it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a great way to say it is that, we've discovered something. And when we do focus on it, that's where it's like we can't escape one. There's the sorrow, there's the sorrow and the pain and that kind of thing. But then, as you put it, there's a direct connection to the amount of love. I mean, anybody can do this as a thought experiment. Someone dies who you didn't care that much about, or you didn't even know. You're going to have less sadness than someone who was your best friend or your parent or someone who, or, I know all relationships are complicated, but what I mean is there's going to be differences depending on how much you loved and were attached to them. And that's not even unhealthy. That's just normal. That's what we can hear about if someone says, oh, did you hear about this person who died tragically, let's say 20 years ago, who was a relative of someone that even I don't know, that I read about in a book, and it was, on, whatever, forever away time. And we can go, oh, and that's about it. We go, oh, maybe. Or if we get really into it, if we have an attachment to the story, whatever. But without the attachment, it just doesn't hurt as much. So if we observe the hurt, we can hopefully then observe the attachment piece, like you just said, the love that is attached to the pain. Whereas if we resist, then we're kind of throwing it all out the window. I mean, if this is in line with what you're saying.
All of it. Yeah. And that's really beautiful that you share that, because you're helping people to do it. The more you share it, I think what we don't, I heard Dr. Edith Eger say this, what you don't feel, you can't heal. You have to be able to feel it. Yeah. And not throw it all out.
Yeah. I wonder if you could tell people what it means when you talk a lot about in the book and things about the concept of alignment. And you've mentioned some of that, but how do we define that, and what does that mean in applied into someone's life?
Well, what I think is so interesting is that I've been doing my podcast for 8 years, and the number one thing that gets people down is being inauthentic. And here's what I mean. They don't even know that that's what's getting them down. But when you unpack, and this is what I mean by alignment, I'll just answer quickly, to me is being authentic. So then when I ask people to sort of tell me more about why they're struggling, it all comes down to not giving themselves permission to fully be authentic. It's so interesting. They don't even know it's happening. It's so unconscious, but I'll say more about it. My friend Mark Groves, who has a podcast, who's wonderful, he said it really well. He said all day long, whether people know it or not, they're making a choice between authenticity or belonging. And most of the time, they choose to quote unquote belong. But what happens when they choose to belong is that they self-abandon. So they self-abandon in order to belong, and then they belong to no one because they no longer belong to themselves. And they sure as heck don't belong to the other person, because the other person is choosing some person they're pretending to be, not them. So then people go through their whole life. And the reason I know this is the number one thing is A, I hear it all the time. And B, Bronnie Ware, who's become a friend of mine, who wrote The Greatest Regrets of the Dying. She was a hospice nurse for 9 years. She said the number one thing that people would say that they regretted was not living life according to them. So it's the same. It checks out. So why is that being out of alignment? Because we're so afraid that people won't get us, or they'll think we're weird, or they won't like what we said, or they'll be triggered by just the fact that we have a boundary, or the fact that we voted for someone different, whatever it is. So we've become hyper vigilant at being someone who we think can control how people perceive us, because we want to be validated by these people. And then we've gaslit ourselves our whole life. And we've told ourselves unconsciously, oh, in order for me to get through life, I have to be out of alignment. Mm-hmm. When the truth is that anybody who we all look up to, the reason that they don't fit in is because they stand out. And when you stand out, you do fit in, because every one of us is supposed to be different. We don't have the same face. Why should we think we would all be the same on the inside? We don't all think the same. We don't all hear the same ideas. That's a good thing, right? So every instrument in the orchestra, if you're a cello, be in alignment. If you're a triangle, be a triangle. If you're a guitar, be a guitar. Don't be a guitar trying to be a piano. That's so weird. Then you're not a guitar. So being in alignment means having the courage to trust yourself, which means a few people might not like it when I say that this is what I want, or this is what I need, or this is how I feel. Maybe that's a good thing, because if you're in their life, you're in their life for a reason. You probably should be yourself in their life. I mentioned my dad. My parents had this horrible divorce and a horrible marriage, and there was so much complexity. And eventually, when my dad and I got back into each other's lives, I was 20. And I decided to be perfect for him. So I never rocked the boat. And, he went through 4 marriages, and it was so much. And my mom and him, the contentious, I had so many things I could have said if I was being honest, but I decided not to be honest. So I would smile, we'd go to lunch, and we'd keep it on the surface. And 3 months before he died, I knew he was dying, and I was visiting him. And I said, I need to tell you everything that's true. And he said, I really want you to. And I thought I was going to have the courage to tell him something maybe for 5 minutes. And instead, we sat for 4 hours, and he was so grateful. And he said, I wish you would have told me this 25 years ago, because I've always felt that even though you seemed happy, there was so much distance. And now what I felt was, I felt that I had robbed myself of real emotional intimacy with my dad, because I didn't trust him to hear the truth. I made a decision that he couldn't handle it, and that the relationship would end if I was honest. Yeah. And instead, I found out that he was available for a deeper relationship. Now, was he always that mature? No. But could there have been more to the relationship? If, I think Liz Gilbert says liberation is always a two-way street. If you liberate yourself, the other person gets a chance to also be liberated, right? So I just wish that in every aspect of my life, I would have the courage to be in alignment and to choose. And I saw this thing on Instagram the other day, and it said, nothing that is meant for you will ever ask you to compromise on who you are. It's not meant for you then. And I think that we patronize everybody because we're like, nobody could handle it if I was really myself. What does that mean? Be yourself, right? Everything in the garden is thriving. It's not worried about offending anything else because it's thriving. If you feel like wearing bright blue eyeshadow and you want to play your music loud, do it. And if it offends people that you're having such a good time, maybe they need to be triggered in that way. Maybe they're going to finally say, why am I so mad at her? Oh, because I don't give myself permission to have that much fun. Great. Maybe eventually they'll give themselves permission because you went first. I think it comes down to, we want everyone to like us, and that is not our job. And actually, it's good that we don't all like the same food. We don't all like the same music. Why should we need to all like each other? No, some people are just not on the same wavelength. My husband doesn't know why I love musicals. And I'm like, I don't know why you don't love musicals. He just thinks they're exhausting. I think that they're the most beautiful experiences of my life. So he doesn't have to like it. It's not a problem. They don't have to convince him to go see Dear Evan Hansen. I went 4 times. I bought the tickets that he didn't need to buy, right? So that when you let that go, you get to be in alignment.
Well, you talk about essentially, I think you're sending a message to the other person as well as yourself. To yourself, you're saying, you know, if if I'm embracing or staying away from rejection or trying to embrace this approval, the approval I'm trying to get, then it's really then I'm in a position where possibly it's quite risky. In other words, to use a musical phrase, we go back to Wicked's been very popular in the news lately, right? When Elphaba, takes off on the broom and finally flies in defying gravity, one of the lines in there talks about chasing love that is already pretty much gone, and that if that's love, it comes at much too high a cost, right?
Such a good
That
line.
we're oftentimes are we trying to hold on to something that just because of the threat of it being taken away. And then to the other person, as you put it, and it's great. I love that story to hear that your dad answered the invitation, because we're giving an invitation to someone to say, hey, could we be more like close? And because I think maybe we could, right? And I'm going to take a chance on you. And when that vulnerability is rewarded by someone else becoming vulnerable and saying, oh, thank you. Yes, I would like to. We worry so much about it, not that we maybe deny ourselves that
Totally.
experience, like you say. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Takes a
And that
lot
is,
of courage, though, to
oh my
face
God.
up to that, right?
Honestly, I like really couldn't possibly believe I could do it. And when I finally did it, I had a couple friends I was on the phone with the days leading up, and I'm like, I don't even think I can do it. I'm like, this is harder than anything. It's harder than writing a book. It's harder. I was like, I don't know if I can do it. I'm so wired into this old part of my nervous system that has chosen to be this way since I was a child with him. I don't know how to do it. I'm so scared. And then when I did do it, I felt like I could move a mountain. I was like, oh my God, if I can have that honest conversation with someone like that in my life, I could do anything.
Wow, it's a really important things that you're talking about, and one of the things I do really like about it also is that in this world of kind of self exploration and mindfulness and meditation, sometimes people can get lost in a vagueness, I guess I should say, and I really like. When you break things down, you're defining them in very, very useful ways, as well as something that gives people freedom and space to explore and be spiritualistic and to have that kind of alignment you talk about. But it's also, you're also bringing things that are like, yeah, authenticity, very much. I know what that means. We can talk about it, very,
Right.
very useful.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's really, really nice of you to say that. I think that it sounds like you do this too. I can tell in the way that you kind of respond. But I think that it's important to make all of it really relatable, because I honestly think one of the reasons that the podcasting industry has taken off is because I don't think people really want to learn from experts. They want to learn from people who are having the curiosity to be on the journey also. And I think there's something about not being the expert doctor off in the mountaintop who does all the research, but rather being the person on the podcast who's just like making that stuff accessible. There's something that feels that we relate to it more. We bring that big concept and make it sound much more attainable.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting way you put that. It's almost like we want to be part of a team, not just listening to a guru, so to speak.
No, it's
Right.
like boring. Nobody wants to be prescribed to.
Yeah. I like that. There's a teamwork aspect, and it's one of the interesting things about podcasting is to say, here's someone either that I admire or that I want to learn from or that I feel an affinity towards, who I get
Yeah.
to spend like an hour a week with, even if we never
Right.
meet.
It's
It's an
true. It's
interesting
like,
thought.
and there's an intimacy there that builds because you're not just listening to a 90-second reel, and there's something about a long conversation where someone's being vulnerable and authentic. And then you feel like, oh, it's not look at me, it's come with me. Like you said, we're doing this together.
Very much. Well, I'm so grateful for what you're doing and that you're here to share it. I want to tell people where to find you and connect with what you're doing. But first, I have my routine question for everyone, which is, what would you recommend to people as a way to give back to the community? Is there a charity or an organization, or else a good, just kind of community practice that you would endorse for people?
Well, I want to say something is that I mentioned that my dad passed, and it was many weeks of like going through hospice and funeral and all that. And this was happening in the summer. And after weeks of that, we went out for the first time to dinner. And I decided that the best way for me to feel better was to make someone feel good for no reason. And so I turned to this couple next to me and I said, can I buy you guys dessert? And I bought this couple dessert, and you won't believe the story. I just had this thought, right? Just do something nice for someone randomly. So I buy them dessert. She gets my Instagram. We follow each other. She texts me 2 hours later and says, thank you so much for the dessert. And I said to her, were you guys on a first date? Because I felt that energy. And she said, yeah. And I said, are you going to go on a second date? And she said, I'm not sure, but I want you to understand something. She said, what you did was so powerful, because she said, I'm a widow and this is my first date in 5 years since my husband died. And she said, when you bought me that dessert, it felt to me that I was being given a sign that the world is a loving place and it's time to get back out there.
Wow. Oh,
Wow.
wow.
I'm telling you that every day I look for opportunities to do things for people for no reason. And I think that we all think we have to change the world, and then we feel like we can't do that. But I think we're really being asked to change the world for one person every day. And we can do that.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. It's a wonderful thing to hear that. And it's funny to say, if we do something kind of random like that, do we find that do we kind of like say, do I luck out, or do I get is there some kind of vibe or guidance to find someone who needs it? Or is it possible that everybody could use a little affirmation and validation at the same time, right? It's not so much, wow, what are the chances? 100% maybe, because we all
100%.
So
exactly.
Well, let me mention a couple things. Oh yeah, first we didn't do it yet. You tell everybody where to find you. Where do we find you?
Thank you. That's so sweet.
Find you.
Oh yeah. How do you find it?
Sounds sinister.
Yeah. My book is called Abundant Ever After. The podcast is called Abundant Ever After. If you want to buy the book, you can buy it anywhere: Target, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. And we actually created, if you go to cathyheller.com/book, Cathy's with a C, you get these like bonuses for free for buying the book. And there's like a class on meditation made easy. You might like that.
Great. Wonderful. I want to mention our charity of focus for this month to everybody. As everyone knows, we pick one each month. And for this month, we are highlighting the Whitebird Clinic in Eugene, Oregon. It's whitebirdclinic.org. This is a local group that has been around for a long time, working to help people to get mental health, dental, medical, and other kinds of direct services that they need, especially for those that who need them provided at low or no cost, and trying to make sure that that's available for people with quite a lot of success in that area. They also help and are involved very much in crisis response, in providing the kind of help that we've been talking about for years in the United States, particularly about having mental health trained crisis services to help kind of reduce, increase good outcomes, let's say, and maybe reduce certain bad outcomes in some situations that don't necessarily require an enforcement of law or statute, but could use someone with training. So involved in training first responders and being right there along with first responders in crisis as well. So again, you can go to whitebirdclinic.org to learn about them. Also, for anyone who joins the Broken Brains Patreon this month, 50% of your donation that you make each month will go to the Whitebird Clinic forever and ever, or as long as you are a donor, which, let's be honest, why not have that be forever and ever? And you will get our bonus materials as well, once again, or go right there and get involved. But once again, with all the charities we share, and times are tough for everybody, it never costs anything to share a web link on social media. And so, that's another thing we can always do if that's what we can do to help. So, Cathy, thanks. This has been so good, and really, really glad to have you on again. And everybody go and check out the Abundant Ever After podcast as well to get more wonderful Cathy stuff.
Thank you, Dwight. You did a really good job. I can see why people really like listening to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Courtemp Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Courtemp Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.